Hi everybody, welcome back to RO Knits and Pearls, True Crime Knit Night episode 2. I am so excited to be greeting you guys again with that. I was worried that I might be the only weirdo in the world out there who wanted to combine yarn and murder. That sounded bad. You shouldn't combine yarn and murder. Yarn should be used to make things and not end things. Just making that clear. I should have phrased it better. People who want to combine yarn with true crime. Better way of saying it, right? Okay, yeah. So I'm really excited to have you guys here. Today's case is the Susan Cox Powell case. And if you are unfamiliar with that case, I would politely ask you to buckle the fuck up because you're in for a ride. And at first you're going to be like, Ara, what are you talking about? This is so clear. It's so obvious what happened. Like, why would this even be interesting? And the facts of this case are going to throw you. Because this case is wild. Like, if you already know about this case, I'm sorry, but not sorry. Like, you know it's crazy. You know it. So the fact that someone else has talked about it before, I don't care. I want to talk about it because I watched a documentary about this case 4 years ago. And no lie, in that 4 years, I have not stopped thinking about it. It will come back to me every few days. I think about this case like all the time, and it lives in my head rent free, you guys. So part of me doing this episode early, I know it's earlier than I told you guys to expect it. It's because I cannot stop thinking about it. And I'm hoping doing this video will like purge me of my obsession, or it will infect all of you with the same obsession. So maybe I'll have someone to talk about it with. Okay. So, and number two, it's also early because I knew that because I'm so familiar with this case already, I wouldn't have to spend a lot of time researching. So that really, it shaved off a lot of the time. And also number three, why it's early is because I'm going on a little beach vacation to San Diego, California to be with my cousin and her family. And I felt guilty about the idea of just like lounging on a beach and leaving you guys with no content. So as a present, thank you for supporting me throughout these weeks. Here's some murder. Because that's my love language. It's murder and true crime. So I hope you feel the same way. Quick disclaimer. This case, if you're not familiar with it, it deals with obviously murder, but also domestic violence, family violence, including violence against children. There's mentions of child pornography. There's mentions of incest. If you are particularly sensitive to those topics, like, thank you for coming and supporting me, but I kindly ask that you return next week when I will have normal knitting content and not true crimey content so that, you're not put off. So that's just me looking out for you. But if you're willing to stick around, welcome. Pull up a chair and, like I said, buckle up because it's about to get wild in here. I'm going to be knitting on a project. It's just a stockinette body. I can't show you what it is because it is still a secret test knit and secret yarn, so I can't talk about it. Don't ask me. But I will show you guys once I'm able to. So I promise you'll see it eventually. But without further ado, I guess that's it for the disclaimers. Let's get started on this story. Now, like I said, this is about Susan Cox Powell, but when she was born, she was obviously just Susan Cox. And she was born in 1981 to a very happy Mormon family. I'll use LDS and Mormon interchangeably. LDS is Latter-day Saints for those who are not familiar with it. And I believe the Mormon Church prefers the term LDS, but because I'm not LDS, not Mormon, I just grew up saying Mormon, so I'll switch back and forth colloquially. Like, I want to say LDS because it's more respectful, but I may switch back, and I promise I'm not trying to be offensive if you are offended by my use of the word Mormon. Like, I'm sorry. Okay? Just real quick. So she was part of a happy Mormon family. Everybody who knew Susan growing up and as an adult said in interviews that Susan was cheerful, she was friendly, sweet, and compassionate. She was beautiful, but not in like a striking, intimidating way, just in a very approachable way that you wanted to be her friend. Josh's family was pretty much on the opposite end from the Coxes. The Powell family was highly dysfunctional. They were also LDS, but Josh's father, Stephen, wanted to leave the church, and that caused a big rift in their family. And the divorce got nasty. So Josh, his brother Michael, and his sister Jennifer were pretty much caught in the middle of it and had to see all the nastiness. And in a divorce filing from Josh's mom in 1992, she alleged that Stephen, Josh's dad, showed Josh and his brother Michael pornography at one point and refused to enforce any limitations on behavior that was damaging and violent. And that limitation, the absence of limitation on behavior in Josh as a teenager would manifest in some pretty disturbing ways. Josh allegedly killed his sister Jennifer's gerbils and threatened his mom with a butcher knife. So, like, obviously something was wrong. That's not great behavior for anyone to exhibit, right? But you would think, okay, he was a teenager and he watched a horrible divorce in front of him, so maybe he was just affected. And he did, he went to college and he seemed more or less normal. And when he was just about out of college, he went to a Mormon single mixer. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Mormon church places a very strong emphasis on family units. The idea is you meet someone else who's Mormon, you marry, you make little Mormon babies, and you raise them in the church, and everybody's happy and Mormon, right? So these single mixers are put on by the church so that you can meet other potential Mormon spouses and get married. And that's exactly how Josh and Susan met. They went to a singles mixer, and within 6 months of meeting, they were married. Obviously, that's a little quick, but no judgment. Sometimes things work. There's not a timeline that's set for every single couple, So I'm not saying there's a rule that they were breaking, but it does raise some red flags, especially considering what we know now in hindsight. But they seemed at the time to make it work because Susan was this beautiful, gregarious person, and Josh was described as kind of a nerdy, dorky, introverted dude. So they seemed to balance each other well. So they got married, and it wasn't an awesome wedding. Like, you can see footage, and Susan seems less than 100% happy because Josh was only spending time with his family and filming like on his own camcorder instead of like interacting with her and the guests. So it was a little odd to see that. But generally speaking, it was okay. And they decided to move in with Josh's dad, Stephen, so that they could save up together and hopefully find a place of their own, because both of them are young. They don't have, a career established. And they don't have a lot of money. So they're saving up, living with Josh's dad. And they lived there for 2 years before they decided to move to their own place in Utah, West Valley City. Now, the marriage at this point, it was bad. They had 2 sons, which Susan was over the moon about. Her sons were named Charlie and Braden, and she was very happy to be a mom. But the marriage had significant issues. One, Josh was becoming increasingly controlling. He was telling her where she could go, when she could go, how to dress, etc. Also, Susan earned pretty much all of the money for the family because although Josh was really into IT and building computers and working on them, he didn't have like any social skills to be able to keep a job. So he was just between jobs all the time. So Susan was the only one who earned a consistent income. But even though Susan was the one who was earning it, Josh was the one who controlled it. So he would decide what the family spent money on. And a lot of it was, gadgets for him and new computer parts for him, state-of-the-art printers, blah, blah, blah. So that was obviously a huge problem in the relationship. And the financial situation deteriorated to a point that the Powells had to file for bankruptcy in 2007, and they had over $200,000 in debt at the time. Susan knew there were problems in the marriage, and she thought about divorce, and she talked about divorce with her friends, but she never actively pursued it because, one, she was concerned about the boys. She was raised to think that a family unit needs 2 parents, and she didn't want to put her boys through a divorce. And also, in the LDS faith, divorce is very strongly discouraged. So because Susan was such a devout person, she really didn't want to pursue divorce. But things were getting so bad to the point that her friends, who were also members of the church, they were begging her to go talk to a divorce attorney. Just talk to him. You don't have to file for a divorce. Just talk to him to see what he says. So Susan, after months, finally acquiesces in July 2008. And this divorce attorney is like, okay, clearly you haven't decided whether or not you want to file. If you do want to file, like, give me a call. But I think in terms of protecting you right now, what you should do is you should film a video of like what your family owns in terms of assets so that you're protected. And this not only prevents Josh from saying that he has nothing of value, as soon as you file, but it also, if something happens to your family or if there's a fire, like, you have documentation of your assets. So Susan's like, okay, well, it's not just in case of a divorce, so maybe this will be okay. So she decides to film that video, and you can find it on YouTube still. And there's this moment where she says, like, I'm filming my assets in case anything happens to me or my family. And she says, like, and I quote, "I hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible." And the way she delivered it, like, the as much as that's possible, it was very sad to see, because, like, you can see in her eyes and hear in her voice, like, the stress and resignation to the idea that there is no more happily ever after for her and her family, that it's not good. And that's super heartbreaking to see, coming from a woman who's been described by everybody who knows her as, like, this bubbly, happy person. So that was super sad. The problems in the marriage come to a head on December 6th, 2009. Susan goes missing. So Susan spent the day at the local LDS ward, the Mormon church. She spent the whole day there with her sons. Josh was not there because Josh was going the way of his father and leaving the church, which, did upset Susan. But at 5 p.m., Susan's home with the boys and Josh, and her friend from church comes over, and they crochet and knit together. Susan was, in fact, a maker. She was crocheting a blanket at the time of her disappearance. Just a fun fact. So Susan's friend noticed that Josh decided to make pancakes for everybody, which was just super freaking weird for him, because he didn't do anything domestic. He didn't cook, he didn't clean, nothing. So when he announced that he was going to make pancakes, she was like, that's really weird. And another point in the weirdness column was that he made them in batches separately. I feel like most people, when you make pancakes, you're like, okay, I'm going to make like 20 pancakes for all of us. And then when they're all done, we divvy them out and we all eat together, right? But no, instead he did, like, the boys had their pancakes first, then he made his own, then he made Susan's friends, then he made Susan's. So that was also odd and stuck out to Susan's friend. Now, after Susan ate the pancakes, she said that she started to feel tired, and her friend was like, hey, why don't you go to bed early? I'll get out of your hair. We can meet up another time. So she leaves. Now, what happens after that is a big old mystery and subject to speculation, obviously, because we don't know exactly what happened. So I'll fast forward to what we do know. On Monday morning, around 9-10 in the morning, the daycare provider for Charlie and Braden notices something is really weird, because it's 9-10 in the morning and the boys haven't been dropped off. They should have already been dropped off by now, because Susan always did that before she went to work. And she calls Susan, she isn't able to get through. And Susan is the type of person who, if she's running 5 or 10 minutes behind, she'll call you and be like, oh, I'm so sorry I'm running late, but I'm on my way. Like, just look out for us. So for her to not pick up, not call, that was just really weird. The daycare provider, who's a family friend, then calls Josh's number, and Josh isn't picking up either. And she's getting really freaked out. So she calls Josh's mom and sister, Jennifer, because they also live in the area. And those two are immediately concerned, because the thought was like, oh my God, what if the entire family is at home, and what if they were victims of carbon monoxide poisoning? Because in Utah, December, it gets very cold. So the idea is that a lot of people use like space heaters and other warming devices. And if you don't ventilate, or if there's a problem with the device, it can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning. So the Josh's mom and sister call police and ask them to perform a wellness check. And the police are like, okay, we've knocked on the door. There's no sign of anything. Like, do we have your permission to like break in and check? And of course, Josh's mom and sister are like, absolutely, like break a window, do whatever you have to, like just get in there. Police don't find a sleeping family that was killed in carbon monoxide poisoning. They find the house is empty. Nobody's in, but the only thing that's there that's out of place was this large wet spot on a carpet with 2 box fans blowing on that spot. So police ask Jennifer, Josh's sister, do you know anything about that? And she's like, no, that's really weird, but where the heck could these people be? And at the same time, Susan's work, because she doesn't show up and she's not picking up, they file a missing persons report because it's just so out of the norm for Susan's behavior. Finally, Josh's sister is able to reach Josh, and she tells him to come home like as soon as possible. Like, everybody's looking for you. Where the heck are you? And Josh, on his drive home, he does something strange. He calls Susan's phone and leaves a voicemail. And he's like, oh, I totally forgot it was Sunday night. Haha, I'm so dumb. By the way, people are saying you're missing. Like, where are you? Call me when you get this. So he rolls up to the house at 5 p.m. with Charlie and Braden in the car. And of course, police are there, very eager to speak to him. Josh has the explanation that he had taken the boys camping in a very remote area Sunday night for fun, just spontaneously decided to take them camping. And Susan, he claimed, was at home asleep when they left because she'd spent the night before they left cleaning a big red stain from the carpet. So like, this is when the big red banner of suspicion is raised, right? Okay, so another thing you have to know is this is December in Utah. Temperatures were below freezing that night, and actually there was a huge amount of snowfall that same night. So he claimed he took these boys aged 4 and 2 to go camping at midnight in a snowstorm. So like, obviously that's not normal. That's really weird. Josh agrees to go to the station immediately. The police notice in the interview, the initial interview, that Josh had cuts on his hands. He plays it off. He says he got it camping. You know, he's just roughing it out there. So obviously you can get cuts. That's fine. So that's how he explained it. Now, during his interview with police, Josh asked, why were you not answering your phone? And Josh told them like, oh, it's because I forgot my charger like an idiot, and I turned it off so I could save battery. And this was a really, really dumb excuse because police, when they looked in Josh's car, they saw Josh's phone plugged in to a charger in the center console of the vehicle. So like, clearly you didn't have a charging issue. You had that the whole time. And then in the space between the console and the seat, they found Susan's pink Razor phone. Do you remember Razors? Anyway, they found her phone missing a SIM card in the car as well. So really suspicious. At the same time they're interviewing Josh, police interview young Charlie Powell, who's 4 at the time. And he says like, yeah, we went camping with my dad and my little brother was there and my mom was there, but mommy didn't come back with us. What he said specifically was, mommy stayed with the Crystals, which is just a really freaking weird thing to say. But of course, everything, even though it was very disturbing to hear Charlie say that mommy went with us, but she didn't come back, West Valley police chose not to arrest Josh on that because all the evidence was circumstantial. Charlie was too young to be able to retell recollections in a coherent, chronological way, and there was no evidence at the house that suggested foul play other than a wet spot. So the police really didn't have anything to go on. And obviously, from hindsight, it was a horrible decision not to arrest Josh because he would go on to destroy evidence, I believe. Like, his sister said that Josh was in a frenzy trying to wash his clothes and burn clothes and throw things away, which is like super freaking suspicious, right? Even more so, like after police seized the van that Josh was driving when Susan went missing, Josh went to the Salt Lake City airport and rented a car and drove it 800 miles and returned it 2 days later. So that's a 400-mile radius, to and fro. And at some point during this trip, he bought a cell phone and activated it near the Utah-Idaho border, but no one to this day has been able to tell where he went. That's just a huge place to search, and nobody knows like what he was doing, where he was. Now, something interesting to note is that Josh's brother Michael, around this time, abandoned a Ford vehicle at a wrecking yard all the way up in Oregon. And that vehicle was found at one point, it was tested by law enforcement to have had human remains inside the trunk. Now, they don't know when it was there. They don't know anything about the human remains, but it was definitely human remains were in there at some point. Okay? So, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to immediately after Susan went missing. And Josh isn't helping at all. Like, he wasn't helping post flyers, except at one Utah Jazz game, which is a basketball game. He showed up late to the candlelight vigil organized by her friends. He just wasn't involved. And he would always avoid press. He would always avoid just being an active participant. It seemed like he just couldn't be bothered and he just wanted to be left alone. So Susan's family at this time thought he was being really weird, but they didn't think that he was involved. They just thought maybe he's traumatized and doesn't know what to do. But the Cox family being willing to give Josh the benefit of the doubt would change when Josh failed to attend a scheduled interview with the West Valley Police Department. And police publicly announced this and said that Josh at this point was getting in the way of police efforts to find his wife. So obviously that doesn't really ingratiate Josh to his in-laws, right? Around this time, police found in their investigation that Susan was keeping a safety deposit box secret. Inside was a letter dated from around the time that she filmed her asset video, remember, at the instruction of the divorce attorney. So when they open this letter and they see it's addressed to family and friends, and it essentially warns them about Josh. In the letter, Susan says that Josh threatened to quote unquote destroy her if she filed for divorce. And she then said, the last line, I think it was, oh God, it was horrible. She said, if something happens to me and I die, it may not be an accident, even if it may look like one, which for someone to think is so plausible to the point that they put it pen to paper, and then hiding it in a safety deposit box that's secret from your husband, it's really sad. Obviously it came from Susan's own hand and she's saying hey, this isn't right. So sad. Okay, so 2 weeks after Susan went missing, in December 18th, 2009, Josh takes Charlie and Braden up to Puyallup, Washington, to stay with his dad, Stephen, for the holidays. So the idea was, we're just going up for Christmas. But actually, the boys would never return to their childhood home. Josh and his brother Michael would come and pack up the house and sell it without telling any of their friends and family about it. Other than Stephen, he may have known about it, but nobody else knew. And people were shocked that he would think to leave the home when everybody still wants to find Susan. The search for Susan was so vast and intense and involved throughout the entire state, and yet Josh couldn't be bothered to even stay in the state. So Josh's sister, Jennifer, who, if you remember, was there from the start, who told the police, break in, I don't care, just find where these people are. She began to suspect that her brother was involved. And then that suspicion grew when he just up and left Utah, that she knew Josh hurt Susan and had something to do with their disappearance. And she even confronted him about it. She wore a wire and wore it up to Puyallup, Washington, and visited her family. And she dragged him to the bathroom going where is she? Where is Susan? Just tell me where she is. And Josh he was a weird robot and denied it. And the way he denied it was super suspicious to me, because what he said was I won't talk about that night because I've been expressly told by my attorney not to talk about it. And For those of you who don't know, I am an attorney and I don't practice criminal law, but I would tell anybody, if you're even questioned by police, get an attorney. Do not talk to the police unless you have an attorney. And that's just to protect you. Don't fall into the trap that it makes you look guilty if you do that. It's your right. Exercise it. I promise you it's better if you exercise it. But anyway, that's when you're talking to police. The issue here is Josh is talking to his sister, his own flesh and blood. And for all he knows, there's no wire. He's just talking to his sister. So for you to stonewall a family member who is harboring suspicions that you may have had a hand in the disappearance of your spouse, like that's when you want to be 100% real, or at least not stonewall them with an attorney. Like, that's for police. With family, you should be honest. Unless you're guilty. If you're guilty, like, yeah, do what Josh did. He did a great job if he's a guilty person. I guess that was a long tangent. Always talk to an attorney. Get an attorney. Ask for an attorney if you're being questioned by police. Just ask for one, okay? That's off my soapbox. Anyway, so we're going to fast forward now to February 2009. This is 2 months after Susan disappeared. And the Cox family holds a press conference. And at this press conference, it was a really big deal. They revealed that Susan had told friends and family that she was going to be ending her marriage with Josh at least by their anniversary coming up that April. So very soon. The Cox family also said that Josh had been physically abusive with Susan at least once in the past. And also they revealed details about Josh's controlling behavior and also the finances on all that. So at this point, they're publicly saying that we think Josh is involved. Now, Chuck, Susan's dad, he becomes an important character at this point. So remember that name, Chuck, Susan's dad. Chuck, Susan's dad. So Chuck, Susan's dad, lives in Washington as well. And to bait Josh, he starts publicizing Susan's disappearance up there. And in Josh's neighborhood specifically. Like, it was super petty. He even organizes something called a honkin' wave. And the idea is there are people holding signs and they ask you to honk and wave so that you show your support. So that's what they were doing with signs about Susan and pictures of her everywhere and in front of the neighborhood grocery store that Josh shopped at. So there was all kinds of media at this honkin' wave, and this sets off Josh's dad, Steven. Steven shows up and gets in Chuck's face, making the claim, this unsubstantiated claim, that Susan ran away with a man named Steven Kocher. He was a dude who lived in Utah and went missing in December 2009, around the same time that Susan did. So Steven's like, yeah, she obviously disappeared with this other Utah guy who disappeared. And the reason we know is because we have proof. There's no evidence, but Steven and Josh were on, national TV cameras going like, we know it because we have Susan's diaries. And they say that she ran away with this guy. Now, this was really freaking stupid because police have you on recording saying that you have Susan's diaries, which to this point, police had never seen before. So you are admitting that you have really important evidence. So obviously this gives police an in to get a search warrant. So Steve was being a fucking moron, essentially. So now the police get a search warrant and Steve, I don't understand, but he goes on like a press tour with Josh, like trying to get Josh interviewed with places. And Josh is like this weird monotone robot denying that he had anything to do with Susan's disappearance. But at no time does he show any emotion. He's just freaking weird. And in one of the interviews, Steve like interrupts and he's like, hey, Josh, how about I be interviewed? Which was, really weird. The camera crew didn't want to do it because why would they want to interview the father-in-law of the missing person, right? But they oblige him reluctantly because they think like maybe if we just, give him a few questions, he'll be done and he'll stop interrupting us so we can go on with our work. But then he goes on camera and he goes on this character assassination campaign saying that Susan was promiscuous and initiated lots of relationships with men. So of course she ran away. And the reason he knows that Susan was so promiscuous was because he and Susan had a sexual relationship. He said this on national television, like publicly. And like you could see the interviewer's brain like screeching to a halt as she's trying to grasp what Steven is saying, because she wasn't expecting this bombshell. You know, she thought that this part would be cut, right? But Steve is like, yeah, we totally, you know, we had sexual contact all the time and she was flirting with me all the time. And I enjoyed it because, you know, why wouldn't I? She was beautiful. And the interviewer's just like, you're her father-in-law. And Steven's like, yeah, I loved it. He was such a fucking creep. Anyway, police got their search warrant and they're executing that. And this is where Josh and the boys are living. And the way the police described it was like, we found a treasure trove of evidence that no one expected or wanted. Because heads up at this point, like Steve, Josh's dad, is the fucking creepiest person I've ever heard of in my life. So they found a ton of evidence in Steve's room, and they found in his closet that he had kept tapes and tapes and tapes of Susan filmed without her knowledge, at home, at work, just out running errands. He would be following her, and sometimes she would do things like, you know, put her hair behind her ear or scratch her leg, and you could hear him on camera being like, oh, she did that for me, like she wants me to see that. And he was just sexualizing everything she did, just living her life. And it was just so creepy. And you can watch these videos if you really want. But like, be warned, it literally made my skin crawl. Just to go into a little more detail, like, because I just have to talk about it. He would take her laundry out and smell her used undergarments, like, on camera. Like, he would save things she had used in little Ziploc baggies and date them and file them. He had a filing cabinet full of little Ziploc baggies with like used Q-tips and cotton swabs and tampons. Like, this dude was just grade A creepy, okay? Like, he even had a secret identity or a stage name where he recorded music. All of the songs were about Susan. And one of the songs that's played on like every freaking documentary is where he's singing like, I can love you in a secret way. I can love you each and every day. And it was just so creepy. Like, And because he had so many videos about Susan, like we even have one where you can hear him confront Susan with his feelings, like he's confessing. He's like, I've been super sexually aroused and I think you've been interested too. And you can hear Susan say in her own voice, like, no. And it weirds me out that you kiss me when my dad doesn't do that. Like, and she was clearly trying to establish boundaries and show that she was uncomfortable. Josh wasn't there in that conversation. And that was one of the reasons why they decided to leave Steve's place and leave for Utah, because the relationship between Josh and Steven was to the point where like neither of them would hold each other accountable. And Susan was like, Josh, your dad is creeping me the fuck out. Why is he so obsessed with me and putting moves on me? It's really weird. And Josh would be like, oh, that's just my dad, and play it off. So the relationship wasn't going to survive if they stayed. So that's why they left for Utah. Now, while they were searching Steven's home, police also found pictures and videos of other women and girls. Clearly, they were unaware that they were being watched, including there were pictures of neighborhood children taking a bath, underage children. They're just children. And so Steve is hit with child pornography charges as well as voyeurism charges. And he's convicted on those, thankfully, thank God. So now at this point, Child Protective Services finally has a reason to get involved, because the boys, you know, Charlie and Braden, were living in the home with Steve, who turned out to be this child pornography creator, enjoyer. What do you call that? A fucking creep. So CPS takes the boys and instead places them with Susan's parents, you know, their grandparents. And they were essentially glorified foster parents. The grandparents didn't have rights as to their custody. They were just granted temporary guardianship over them, essentially. So the boys, you know, they've been through so much. Like, can you imagine, like, they were just 4 and 2 years old. Like, they were so impressionable. And your mom just, you know, you go camping with her and you don't come back with her. Then everybody is asked, nobody's allowed to talk to you. Josh wouldn't allow them to talk to people. You know, he kept them pretty much at home at all times. And it's just so sad to think that their lives have been so abnormal, when I'm sure what Susan wanted was for them to be raised as normal kids, right? Anyway, so with the Coxes, with Susan's parents, the boys start to have fun and open up, and also tell people about that night. So Charlie and Brayden are interviewed again, and at one point at daycare, Brayden drew a picture of a van with 3 people inside and told daycare workers, like, oh, that's us camping, but mommy was in the trunk. And Charlie did another interview at this point, and it was just heartbreaking because, like, you could tell he was coached. He starts talking about how his mom didn't come back with him, and then he realizes he said something that he wasn't supposed to, because you can sense a change in his tone, and he says, I didn't want to tell you that. We don't talk about Susan. I'm a good boy. I can keep secrets. So, like, obviously he was coached to say that, and it's so heartbreaking that he was calling his mom, who went missing, Susan, because obviously Steven or Josh would only refer to her as Susan and not mom. And I don't know why, but that really, like, that tugged at my heartstrings. Okay. Anyway, so everybody was hoping that the boys, you know, after a lot of therapy, maybe they would be able to tell people one day what happened that night. So, but until that happened, Chuck and Judy were fighting Josh for custody, because Josh was trying to get custody of the boys back. And he was sure he was going to win. And the odds were really good in his favor, because he is the biological parent, as long as he wasn't living in Steve's home, because the reason that CPS took them was obviously that the home was unsafe. If Steven's things were still in there, what if the kids found child pornography or any other kind of pornography? It wasn't a fit home. But West Valley Police Department, you know, where this originally took place, the police department was still keeping tabs on the case, because they wanted to make sure the boys were safe. They were never able to find Susan, you know, even despite all the extensive searches, manual searches. They just wanted to keep the boys safe. So they contacted Puyallup PD and told them that, hey, in the initial search of Josh and Susan's home, we seized a bunch of stuff, including computers, right? And in Josh's computers, we found images of simulated child pornography, bestiality, and incest. Now, none of this is technically illegal. Like, simulated child porn is still protected under freedom of speech, you know, under the Bill of Rights, but it's definitely had a huge impact on the custody hearing, because if you have those kinds of images lying around, or if you are a person who likes to consume those types of images, it does speak as to your fitness to raise children, right? So February 1st, 2012, the Washington state judge rules that 7-year-old Charlie and 5-year-old Brayden would remain with Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy. And the judge also ordered Josh to get a psychosexual evaluation by court-appointed examiner. And it's found at the initial examination that Josh had narcissistic personality traits. It was very clear by his inability to admit even small personal shortcomings or weaknesses. And so the examiner recommended supervised visitations with his sons several times a week, and they were meant to be at a neutral location, but he talked the social workers into letting the boys come to his rented home, because he was like, okay, well, they were taken on the basis that they can't be at Steve's house. I'm not at Steve's house. I'm at my own place. I'm renting it out. Like, the boys can come here, right? But again, his custody bid for reunification fails. And this comes to a head on February 5th, 2012. So 2 months and 4 years after Susan goes missing. So the social worker arrived at Josh's rented home with Charlie and Brayden in the car for a supervised visit as scheduled. The boys do what every other, you know, excited kids do. They jump out of the car and run up to the door and, like, go headfirst in. And the social worker is a little older, so she, like, gets up to the house, and Josh is at the door because he just he just opened it for the kids, and the kids ran in, and he smiles this weird smile at her, looks at her, and slams the door in her face. And his kids are inside, unsupervised. She smells gasoline and hears him say, "Boys, I have a surprise for you." And the social worker knows immediately that something is wrong. She calls 911. She's like banging on the door and the windows, trying to get inside because he's not supposed to have unsupervised visits. And obviously there's something wrong. Now the 911 operator, and you can find the audio of this too on YouTube, but the 911 operator is just so rude and tells the social worker that basically, like, this isn't an emergency, you're freaking out over nothing and you're wasting my time. He was like fighting with her on whether or not this was a life-threatening situation, and she was begging for them to send someone immediately. She was still on the phone begging, going to the neighbor's house begging for help, when Josh's rented home erupted in flames. Now, there were no survivors. Once the fire was extinguished, the investigation showed that what happened was Josh, after the boys entered the home, he attacked the boys, who were 7 and 5, with a hatchet, and there were multiple wounds to both boys. It was mainly focused on the head and neck areas. After he attacked them with the hatchet, Josh sat down on a can of gasoline next to them. After he'd already spread multiple cans of gasoline around the house, he lit and dropped a match and went up in flames. The autopsy would show later that all 3 actually died from smoke inhalation, meaning that even the children were alive when the fire began. So obviously, Chuck and Judy, Susan's parents, are completely devastated. Her friends and family, like all of them, are just completely devastated. And it was really sad because one of Susan's friends did an interview, and she said, like, I used to pray that Susan would still be found alive somewhere, but after Josh killed the boys, now I prayed that Susan was dead all along so that she could be there to greet Charlie and Braden in heaven, which was just, a million times heart-shattering. The Coxes, Susan's parents, would eventually file and win a lawsuit against Washington State Child Protective Services for failing to prioritize the boys' safety over Josh's parental rights. Now, the remaining mystery, because the boys are dead, Josh is dead, it's pretty clear that Josh is the one who killed Susan. The remaining mystery is, where is Susan? In July of 2012, a mine explorer found a mine 30 miles west of where Josh said he was camping that night when Susan went missing. He said he found a mine that was filled up with gasoline and burned out. And Josh had been known to tell people that the best place to dispose of a body would be down a mine shaft because it wouldn't ever be found. And Utah, of course, is riddled with abandoned mine shafts. So I think there's a good chance that that may have been the actual mine where he disposed of Susan. Now, another tragedy to add on to that is February 2013, Josh's brother Michael, believed by many, including me, to have helped Josh with Susan's disappearance, he killed himself by jumping off of a parking garage in Minneapolis, taking whatever secrets he had, whatever knowledge of where Susan is, to the grave. So the only person left alive who might know where Susan is Stephen. And Stephen already invoked his Fifth Amendment rights not to self-incriminate and not to give a statement, so he's not talking. So my personal belief, this is all hypothetical, but this is what I believe went down. I believe that the day Susan went missing, after her friend left, what happened was Josh had drugged Susan with the pancakes. You remember he made everyone's batches separately? I think he put in some kind of drug in Susan's pancakes, probably just sleeping pills. But it wasn't enough to kill her. It just kind of made her sluggish and incapacitated to a certain extent. I think eventually Susan tried fighting back, and he killed her. And that explains the cuts that were found on his hands after. I believe he put Susan's body in the trunk and packed up the camping gear, telling the boys that mommy's sleeping in the trunk, but we're all going on a surprise camping trip, but, you know, mom's in the back. Don't worry about it. While they were there, I think he disposed of Susan's body in a mine. But when his phone starts blowing up and the investigation starts and it becomes very clear that people aren't just going to think that Susan ran away and left her two boys, he realizes that she'll soon be found. So he drives out in that rental car and he picks up her remains and burns up the mine that she was in to destroy any trace evidence. Then buys and turns on a phone to coordinate with his brother Michael while they're arranging a place to meet. I think Josh gave Susan's remains to his brother Michael, who then hid her in another state, probably in a remote area, maybe in another mine. And he disposed of the car Michael disposed of the car that he was driving in Oregon, when later law enforcement would find it and it would test positive for human remains. So I believe Stephen became aware of what happened after the fact. I believe Stephen may have a general idea of where Susan is, but I don't think he'll ever talk because he's such a fucking creep. And to this day, Susan's body has never been found. Like I said, this happened in West Valley City, Utah, which is pretty close to me where I live now in Salt Lake. And when my friends and I talk about going camping and going exploring, we do talk about like, maybe we'll find Susan because she deserves to be found. The Coxes, you know, her parents lost their daughter, and then for them to lose their grandchildren, you know, their last physical connection to who their daughter was, like, I can't imagine that kind of loss. So I think Susan's still out there. I don't know that she'll ever be found, especially if they, you know, disposed of her in the desert. It's just super sad. It's super sad, and it has weighed on me. And the facts of the case, like, it was just so weird and crazy. Like, you couldn't write this stuff. If you wrote it in a script, people would think that it was completely asinine because it was so ridiculously contrived, but it's not. It's real life. This was real life. And I'm just so sorry to the Coxes. Like, it's just so sad, you guys. But I hope Susan is in peace with her boys, and I hope her boys, oh God, they were so young. I don't think there's anything more I could say other than that it was just a really, really tragic thing that happened to them. And also, in case you're curious, because I was curious after I heard about this case, the 911 operator who like refused to send help to the social worker, he was publicly reprimanded. Like, he got in trouble, but nothing significant. And he went on interviews saying like, oh, of course I feel guilty about it now. It just goes to show you that like burnout is real and I should have been more sympathetic. But like, you should have done your freaking job, you know? Like, those boys could have been saved. There was enough time for them to save the kids. And CPS in Washington, I believe, completely fucked up. They had a responsibility to keep those boys safe, and they didn't. Like Josh, it was clearly premeditated. He was, you know, he was not okay. And for them to give a supervised visit just days after he lost his bid to reunify and regain custody of the kids, like, bad idea. Okay, that's where I'm at, mentally speaking. I hope you guys didn't peek too much at what I was doing. I'm really excited to show you more. Return next week for more normal knitting content, but I hope that this case haunts you as much as it did me, because I really, you know, just like DM me about it. Like, tell me what you think. I just want to talk about it, okay? Sorry. This case made me crazy. I'm sorry I was so weird. I love you all. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Don't marry creeps named Josh, I guess. That's discriminatory. To Joshes everywhere. I don't know. Okay, bye guys. I have nothing more to add. Thank you for watching.